We've heard a lot this morning about hydrogen. There's been conversations as to whether or not it's going to, take the place of natural gas. What role can it play in supplanting gasoline? But we really haven't dived down. I guess that's the right term. Into how it's going to work. What are its real capabilities, and how long out are we talking about? So to talk about those issues, we have Garrett Goldfinger, the Project Director, Hydrogen Development with NextEra Energy Resources. Garrett leads the hydrogen project development for NextEra Energy. NextEra is the world's largest generator of renewable energy from wind and sun, and the world's largest electric utility by market cap. Before joining NextEra, Garrett spent over a decade advising clients on multi-billion-dollar capital projects, including power generation from alternative fuels, LNG infrastructure, and advanced nuclear technologies. Garrett, welcome to the stage.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me here. My name is Garrett Goldfinger, and I lead hydrogen project development for NextEra Energy. I'm responsible for 35 states. New Jersey's one of them, and I happen to live here, so I'm certainly excited about the prospects of hydrogen in the state of New Jersey. Here today we're going to talk a bit about hydrogen's role in the clean energy future. I'll talk a bit about the background on NextEra, why we're interested in hydrogen, what we're doing in the space, and how that could be applied to the state of New Jersey. So to kick off, Ray provided a great introduction for the company. I joined 2 years ago, and I was kind of shocked to hear about some of these big ticket items about who NextEra is. Oftentimes when we talk about the company, it's the largest firm that no one's ever heard of. That's almost by design. We don't advertise. But there are some big ticket, I would say, statements that the company can make. As Ray mentioned, we're the world's largest producer of renewable electricity from the sun and the wind. That was no mistake. We built our first wind farm in 1998 and have ramped that up to a nearly 26 gigawatt portfolio of solar, wind, and batteries. Our backlog over the next 2 years will add another nearly 20 gigawatts. For reference, the install capacity of the state of New Jersey is 17 gigawatts. We're currently the 5th largest capital investor in the state of New Jersey, or in the U.S., which was somewhat surprising to me. We're only lagging behind some of the larger telecom companies. We've invested $43 billion over the last 3 years. In New Jersey alone, we've deployed 70 projects, mostly in the solar and battery space. That total investment's $250 million. And we're primarily comprised of 2 companies. One is Florida Power and Light. That's roughly 2/3 of our revenue. It's a rate-regulated utility in the state of Florida. Covers a pretty wide service territory at this point, from Pensacola, Florida in the Panhandle down to Miami. The other third of the business is where I sit, which is on the energy resources side. We're a development organization. We design, construct, operate clean energy assets. That's roughly a third of the business. And that's essentially the overview on the company. Now, why are we interested in hydrogen? And maybe it's a good question for why is the state interested in hydrogen? We view hydrogen as a primary means to unlock America's clean energy resources and address some of those hard-to-abate sectors of the U.S. economy. It might be hard to see because these numbers are very small on the left, but what this is a walk of our existing renewable portfolio. We beat our chest that it's so large, but it pales in comparison to the total U.S. energy needs. Walking from our installed portfolio to the right is the total renewable energy market. That's us and all of our peers. If renewables were to penetrate just the power sector, that third column there shows the comparison of renewables and the power sector to the total needs of the U.S. economy. So what are we missing here? We're missing some of the intermittent storage that the last presentation discussed, which hydrogen can address in some future use cases. The transportation sector, and transportation alone in the United States consumes nearly 1/3 to 40% of all U.S. energy. And then some of the applications that we discussed earlier today about the role of natural gas in residential heating, commercial heating, and industrial applications. So what is NextEra doing in the space? Right now, we like to believe that we're providing leadership in green hydrogen and the energy transition. We're doing that through 3 primary means. First is pilot projects. Second is through strategic partnerships. And lastly is in technology investment. Hydrogen, I think we've had a lot of talk about electrolysis, but even to back up, hydrogen exists as an industry today. It's moved in pipelines throughout the Gulf Coast. It's currently stored both above ground in liquid storage tanks and below ground in salt caverns, and it's used for a variety of applications, primarily for refining. So hydrogen is produced here in Linden, New Jersey at the Bayway Refinery. What it primarily does is it removes sulfur and upgrades fuel products for a lot of the end-use products that we use today, thinking about kerosene, gasoline, jet fuel, and diesel. Hydrogen is also a fundamental building block of the fertilizer and agricultural industry because it's used to produce anhydrous ammonia. Ammonia is the primary nitrogen-based fertilizer used worldwide, and it's responsible for feeding half of the world's population. There are other use cases for hydrogen as well. It's used to make methanol, which is a precursor for natural gas. It's used to produce float glass, which are large glass panels like you might see over here, used as rocket fuel by NASA and Blue Origin, among a variety of other applications. So the technology to move, store, transport, and use hydrogen has existed for decades. So what's changed? It's primarily the production means. So today, hydrogen is produced in the United States by reforming water and natural gas to produce hydrogen. That reaction releases CO2, and it's referred to in the industry as gray hydrogen. Very carbon-intensive product, and that's what we're looking to displace. So electrolysis does it different. You take electricity from renewable energy resources and ultra-pure water, and you split it into its core components, oxygen and hydrogen. Oxygen is vented and given back to the atmosphere, while hydrogen, as a clean energy molecule, can be used to either displace all those existing use cases or be used in a lot of these new novel applications that we'll be discussing here today. So first, NextEra is putting our money where our mouth is. We've spent $65 million in an investment in our Okeechobee Clean Energy Center for the Cavendish NextGen Hydrogen Hub. So the Okeechobee Clean Energy Center is a new next-generation 1,700 megawatt gas-fired combined cycle power plant that's providing reliability to Florida Power and Light system. The Cavendish Hydrogen Hub will demonstrate a few different technologies for us. First off will be the demonstration of load following an electrolyzer with solar, similar to some of the pilot projects that were discussed earlier here today. Second will be blending of hydrogen with natural gas for the fuel supply to the combined cycle power plant. And lastly will be to analyze the combustion dynamics of what happens when you burn hydrogen in an existing combustion turbine application. We've publicly announced that we've made orders with Cummins for 25 megawatts of electrolyzers. At the time, it was the largest PEM order, but with the Inflation Reduction Act passing, that record's being broken almost on a daily basis. We've placed orders for our EPC contractor and major equipment. That project will break ground at the end of this year and come online at the end of next year. We're not only looking at electrolyzers. There's a variety of different production means and interesting technology applications that we can also bring to the marketplace. We've placed two strategic investments in technology companies that I find to be pretty exciting. First is Monolith Materials. Monolith is a really interesting design. They were a startup company out of California. They moved to Nebraska to pilot their first plasma arc reactor. What this Monolith technology does is, as opposed to using water as a feedstock along with electricity, it uses natural gas as a feedstock. Consumes a similar amount of electricity to an electrolyzer process, but splits natural gas into its core components. Natural gas is primarily methane, CH4. The C drops out as a solid carbon product. The H, the hydrogen, will then be used in different end-use applications. The interesting thing about Monolith Materials is that that C has a commercial value. It's called carbon black. And carbon black is used today in a number of tire applications. It's why tires are black, and rubber products. So Monolith has a technology that can really unlock America's existing natural gas supply stream, cheap shale gas that's really revolutionized the way that the world economy works around natural gas, while also leveraging clean energy resources like renewables and producing two products as opposed to venting one to the atmosphere with very little commercial value. Infinium's also an interesting company. They're not a hydrogen producer. Instead, they're more of a packager. Infinium's technology takes hydrogen and CO2 sources from biogenic applications. You can think of ethanol plants and their equivalents, and they combine them into a fuels product. So we refer to this as electrofuels. Infinium will take green hydrogen, CO2, and they'll make ultra-low carbon jet fuel and diesel. So you can think of a company like this serving United Airlines in Newark, New Jersey with an ultra-low carbon product that is a drop-in replacement for what they're already burning today. Lastly, and I am a car guy, so this made me pretty excited. We signed an MOU with BlackRock and Daimler to deploy a nationwide network of electrification. This is targeting towards medium and heavy-duty trucks, very dissimilar to other charging networks that you've seen out there. What this network will do is that it's focused on providing EV charging and hydrogen fueling stations for that heavy-duty segment. A bit later in the presentation, we'll get to why that's so important. Our initial deployment of these fueling corridors are going to be focused on the East Coast, states like New Jersey, where the Advanced Clean Truck Rule has been adopted, out in California and the West Coast, where there are multiple incentive packages available for EV and hydrogen fueling stations, going up through Oregon and Washington State, and into Texas, which is the largest freight market and consumer of diesel fuel in the country. You know, oftentimes I get the question of why battery or why hydrogen electric trucks? Who's going to win? And I always kind of laugh at that because it's almost like asking someone like, would you buy an SUV or a pickup truck? Like, it all depends on what your use case actually is. So, you know, in a lot of our team's analysis, we've looked at where does hydrogen make sense and where do battery electric trucks make sense? And really it breaks down to this. Hydrogen has an advantage in several spaces. One is that the infrastructure is not grid tied to charge a hydrogen fuel cell truck. This looks like a conventional fueling station. It refuels a truck in 15 minutes and you're back on the road. Both vehicles use the same powertrain. You have an electric powertrain, electric motor, and a battery. In the case of a hydrogen fuel cell truck, you have a much smaller battery that's just used as a buffer between the fuel cell, which is like a reverse electrolyzer, and the wheels. In a battery electric truck, obviously the battery is providing all of your storage and your motive power. So we see the hydrogen fuel cell trucks as having a really niche application where you can't sit and recharge for several hours on a 500-mile journey, especially along some of the interstates in New Jersey, or potentially those passing through the state, emitting into our atmosphere and moving on to their next jurisdiction. So our role here in development will be site selection, construction, design, operations, energy supply, and fuel supply for this network of EV chargers and hydrogen fueling stations. And so with that, we're really focused on providing like the full suite of solutions. Renewable energy has been and is our core business. We are testing electrolyzer technology through our pilot projects, and that will form the foundation of what we're looking to do and expand into much larger projects at scale. In terms of processing and storage, as I mentioned, it's a very proven technology at this point. You know, whether we compress and move this by dedicated hydrogen pipelines or liquefy and move this product by truck, our team is investigating both transportation means. In terms of dispensing, it ties right back into the conversation we just had, looking at that MOU. So really at that point, we'll have a full infrastructure network built out, and all that we really need to do is work with our end customers, our end users, and see how much, when, and where they might need this product. So switching gears a bit, you know, I often get asked, can hydrogen be used for everything? And I say, yeah, theoretically you could, but you know, economics plays in, use cases play in, and that's an important thing to consider. You know, there was a comment made earlier about, you know, innovation really needs to be tied to economics, and I fully agree with that. So we think a lot about where does hydrogen make sense in the near term, where does it make sense theoretically, and when does that timing actually line up? So in looking at these two charts, you know, to me I look at what fuel are we actually displacing and how much does that fuel cost? And two, where's the technology actually have some benefits? On cost of fuel, you know, what this chart shows might be hard to see in the back, but it's a conversion of diesel pump pricing taken from 2 days ago to $1 per MMBTU pricing. to put that on parity with natural gas. So when we're looking at natural gas pricing, call it $8, it's moving around every day. Looking at gasoline at $3.68 a gallon, that is the equivalent of nearly $31 per MMBTU. Move on to diesel, and you're at nearly $40 per MMBTU. So the difference between displacing natural gas and displacing diesel fuel is almost 5x. Now let's go to energy efficiency. Hydrogen fuel cell buses are currently in operation in Ohio, in California, and what they've seen through testing is that they're seeing 90% better energy efficiency ratios. That means that they're consuming significantly less fuel, and because they're able to rapidly refuel, they see significant benefit in running those vehicles. When you're looking at the total cost of actually transporting freight or people, the number one cost is drivers, and that's for good reason. The number two cost is fuel. Capital is a third distant cost. So being able to drive down your fuel costs improves the economics of any freight operation. When we're looking at heavy-duty trucking and passenger vehicles, we're seeing a 50% increase in energy efficiency. That's primarily driven to the fact that city buses will benefit from not idling during that stop-and-go traffic. There's a lot of benefit to the electric powertrain, where heavy-duty vehicle and passenger vehicles, you might be going 60 miles an hour, hauling freight, whatever it might be on the highway, but you're still benefiting from regenerative braking and other efficiency gains of a fuel cell versus a diesel truck. Power generation has a very marginal increase in energy efficiency when compared to any of these other use cases. New Jersey has done a great job of displacing almost all of our power generation outside of natural gas. So when we're thinking about what the opportunity cost is, it's moving natural gas off the grid for power generation. So while that will be a reality, once hydrogen achieves scale and drives down its overall costs on an MMBTU basis, it's not the first place I would look at. I'd look at where's the efficiency greater, where's the fuel expensive. So, where does this make sense, and how does this tie into the state's goals? To me, hydrogen can effectively displace diesel fuel, especially in heavy-duty trucking applications. When we look at the state's emissions profile, it's a little shocking to me. 40% of our emissions are from the transportation sector. The power sector tends to get all the attention, but double the emissions from the electricity sector, if we multiply that by 2, the emissions, it would be equivalent to what transportation is today. If we slice and dice that transportation sector further, you'll see that 10% of the total state's emissions are from heavy-duty vehicles. That's more than half of what the power sector currently emits. So will it be impactful? The answer is yes. Last point I want to leave you guys with, and maybe I'll give Ray a little time back to get on schedule here.
You may have some questions though, but okay.
We can have questions, yeah, that works. Is where does that make sense in the state of New Jersey? When looking at the cases in California, they've provided a lot of leadership and guidance on how do you create a beachhead market for a technology like this, and the ports have always been the answer. We're looking at Port of Long Beach pilots and Port of Oakland pilots for hydrogen fuel cell trucking, looking at building those initial fueling stations, making the greatest impact to environmental justice communities that live near the port, and effectively decarbonizing those routes, which are highly predictable. Port drayage is a very repetitive process. Effectively, what that means is that there are trucks that arrive at the port, they idle there, they pick up containers, and they move to predetermined destinations. There's been a lot of studies done by the Port Authority and looking at what Hatch has done in the past on where those drayage routes are most highly concentrated, so it's easy to think of where fueling stations might go. California has taken that lead by installing fueling stations at the port and then destinations that are, say, within 30 miles for that continuous use. When you look at the Port of Newark, Elizabeth, it's pretty impressive in terms of economic activity and contributions to the state. The port is the third largest in the United States, only behind the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles with all the container ships coming in from China. It currently handles $200 billion of product and over 4 million containers per year. Port sees 25,000 trucks a day. Those trucks are typically concentrated in a very tight network. Thinking about moving that out down the New Jersey Turnpike, there's a reason there's a dedicated truck lane on the Turnpike. I-80 going out west, 24, 78. all these close to highway networks to the port, and they'll drop those containers off at the next warehouse where it's then relayed out of state, thinking about serving areas like Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, Delaware. California has really stepped up in terms of leadership to provide not only the vision to provide decarbonization there, with things like the advanced truck rules, they're looking at restricting the amount of combustion emissions from the port and pushing towards zero emission vehicles, but also in terms of grant programs. So the reason California has nearly 100 hydrogen fueling stations is because they provide a 75% grant for hydrogen fueling stations fueled by clean hydrogen. They also have a program that can buy down a third of the cost of hydrogen fuel cell trucks, and a controversial but effective low carbon fuel standard program that incents clean hydrogen and clean fuel consumption in the state, which is paid for by the dirty fuel producers. So all those things really make California the beachhead market, and there's a lot of activity happening today, but we're seeing a lot of other states starting to take note of the impacts there, the environmental justice advantages, and proposing similar grant programs. Last thing I'll say here is that when you look at drayage and this kind of approach, it really addresses many aspects of the New Jersey Energy Master Plan. Bullet 1.1 is decarbonizing transportation. So obviously it's top of mind for the state, but also looking at decarbonizing the port, creating clean energy jobs. Hydrogen has really been effectively catalyzed by both the previous bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. Right now, it's been mentioned, there's $7 to $8 billion available for hydrogen hub funding. Concept papers are due pretty quickly, so there's a lot of things that are happening right now on that. But in terms of long-term investment, the hydrogen production tax credit has really been the most effective in being able to buy down cost of hydrogen. So, with that, I just want to share some thoughts from our end on where we see hydrogen today, where we think it could benefit the state the most in the near term, and certainly appreciate all your time here today. Thank you.
Don't leave yet. I appreciate the time back, but let me take up a few of those minutes just with a couple quick questions.
Sure.
Whenever people mention hydrogen, the naysayers always talk about safety issues and bridges and tunnels, and for that reason, it could never be a reliable transportation fuel. Is safety an issue, and if so, or is it perception of safety?
Yeah, I came out of the nuclear space, so safety was always a huge topic from that end. And what I really learned is energy as a whole is dangerous. So I think approaching it from that perspective and having respect for these different production means is the first way I tend to approach it. But to address your question, there's been decades of hydrogen handling and safety protocols that have been developed over the course of the existing hydrogen industry. Really, the initial production of hydrogen for refining and for ammonia goes back to the 1920s. So I consider those safety protocols as robust, but do need to be respected. And really, at this point, there's a lot of education that needs to be done to have people understand what hydrogen actually is, leak prevention, national codes and standards, and best practices. So I think generally people are surprised as to how many different industries currently handle hydrogen. All of our power plants in the US that use rotating generators currently get hydrogen deliveries for cooling. So people know more than they think on it.
And just one more, you mentioned the Advanced Clean Truck Act, which New Jersey has just adopted, as well. And everyone's looking at that as, truck EVs. Do those regs prevent hydrogen from coming on board? Or, can you work within the Advanced Clean Truck, regs in order to advance hydrogen trucks as well?
Yeah, so the Advanced Clean Truck Rule was really targeted towards zero-emission trucks, so that would have applications for battery electric and for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles.